This is Build Without Chaos. I'm Colleen Goepfert. One clear idea every episode for operators, founders, and marketers who build with intent. Welcome back to Build Without Chaos. Today's guest is Danny Speros. Danny has spent his career inside companies navigating very different stages of scale, complexity, and pressure, including leadership roles at Zenefits and now Automation Anywhere. What made this conversation interesting to me is that Danny has operated close to moments where growth, narrative, and internal reality don't always move at the same pace. That's really what this season of Build Without Chaos is exploring. This conversation is about what leaders unlearn after periods of hyper-growth or organizational strain, and what it takes to rebuild clarity once urgency stops being a sustainable operating model. Danny, I'm glad to have you join me today on this episode.
Thank you so much, Colleen. I'm glad to be here.
I'd love to know, you've worked across a number of impressive companies. So what initially drew you to the roles and the companies along the way that you chose?
Strange route to some of the roles that I've had. Some were intentional and some sort of fell into place the way things worked out. I first joined Zenefits as a sort of customer-facing HR leader. And so Zenefits originally was HR software that was coupled with the small and medium-sized business benefits brokerage. And so the Zenefits generated revenue through the brokerage fees and then offered HR software that could replace the need for an HR department. And from the outside looking in, when they first launched that messaging, I thought, you can't replace the need for people in a world full of people. Zenefits came to the point of view that they wanted to augment their services to include HR services. And so I joined Zenefits as sort of the experienced professional, helping customers to navigate the world of human resources, people experience, talent acquisition, and compliance for companies that may not have the budget to be able to hire top-level expertise. We also sort of trained and developed a handful of people from within the organization to be customer-facing HR professionals too. And so joining Zenefits was an opportunity to sort of look at the position and the role and the function and through a different lens of helping others. In my time at Zenefits, at first, it became pretty apparent that there were certainly needs on the inside of the organization from a people perspective. And not long after joining, I switched from customer-facing HR to internal-facing HR. And in that role, had the opportunity to experience a number of different significant changes, from a pivot in our business model to CEO change through acquisition and a number of different changes.
Yeah.
Ultimately, Zenefits was acquired by a company called TriNet, a much larger company with a good history of profitability and a slightly different business model. And the two organizations complemented each other in terms of technology, services, and the ability to provide sort of a full spectrum of services to small and medium-sized businesses. And when we reached a point where that was stable, I opted to go to what I called at the time the Goldilocks of scenarios, to join Automation Anywhere. I wanted a role where I could have an impact across an organization for a long period of time, the potential to learn not just about the role of human resources and people experience, but really how a business runs, how a business evolves, how the technology helps our customers. And so it's been a great opportunity to do those things.
Yeah. I remember Zenefits back in the day.
Yeah.
One thing that stood out to me in your background is that you've seen very different versions of scale and intensity, right? You were at Zenefits, now you've moved on from there. So when you think back across these environments, what did they teach you about what scale can distort inside an organization?
The word scale gets used for a handful of different things, and I think there's some distinct differences. So sometimes we talk about scale as in growing, rapid growth, scaling up. Sometimes we talk about scale, and I've had the experience to try and navigate the different meanings of scale. So growing fast is one. one time that we use that term. Creating processes that allow us to grow the business without having to grow our workforce as quickly is another way that we think of scale. So how do we take what we have and make it work across an even broader spectrum and scope? Being able to experience both of those elements of scale, in some instances, same company in the course of a year and a half, and shifting. So I think the distorting effect is really growing a workforce isn't always growing the business. And sometimes it's absolutely necessary to grow the workforce in advance of growing the business. And then the flip that sometimes happens, and I've seen it happen, is ultimately growing the business may require thinking differently about the people that we're hiring, the numbers of people that we're hiring, where they're going, what they're doing, and how they're interacting. And so building a company that can scale without massive expense is, I don't know, I enjoy that element of scale and growth. And it's a place where I've had an opportunity to do some neat things, both at Zenefits and at Automation Anywhere.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So, when you're scaling a company, what comes first? Is it needing the people or is it meeting the objectives that the company is putting forth?
So I always like to take it from the approach of what are the objectives?
Yeah.
What are the company's outcomes that we're trying to achieve? I think in early stage startups where customer acquisition is moving quickly, sometimes the realization is that we'll always be behind on our hiring plan. So just hire as much as we can and we'll figure out where to put everybody and what to do
Okay.
at a later time. It's not where I operate at my best.
Yeah. I
I
was
like
gonna
to,
say, that's a tough one.
I think there are people in the industry that are phenomenal at it. Yeah, let's open 500 requisitions in 3 different countries and let's go.
Oh,
And it boggles my mind. And so I like to work more closely with what are the needs we're trying to achieve?
yeah.
What are the specific skills that we're going to need as part of this? What can we develop from within? And what do we need from outside?
I mean, that's how I think too. I just think in high growth tech, sometimes that can get distorted. I remember
Mhm.
being in an organization where they wanted just 2 interviews before you hired somebody instead of putting someone through a full panel. And when I look back at that time, I think, man, those people didn't end up working out or didn't accepting the offer. It became more chaotic than it needed to be. So I think sometimes you think you're doing the right thing by scaling and getting people in the right seats, but when you look back at it, it's not necessarily the right path.
Yeah, I think, and I've seen both sides of that, like in some elements of campus hiring or in high growth, hiring managers are given the authority to just make decisions after one interview. I've also seen the flip side where you get 7, 8, 9 interviews. I think when I joined Zenefits, I met 6 different people on 8 different interviews before I
Yeah.
joined the organization. I'd like to think they made a good choice. I think it also, as a candidate, gave me the assurance that I needed joining
Yeah.
Zenefits at that time, that I got a good sort of view of the organization, how people were thinking about the future of the organization, how I could fit.
Yeah.
And there's probably a perfect balance in there somewhere. I'm not sure yet what it is, but yeah, I
So,
think, yeah.
oh, go ahead.
I
You
just
have a question?
think being intentional around what it is you're looking for, I think is the biggest thing. I
Yeah.
think if companies in the hiring panel have a clear view of what it is they want and what looks good, then it goes pretty quick.
That's really the key to navigating hyper-growth companies, right? How can you balance scaling quickly and being intentional when you're doing it? I think it's a constant push and pull, and it sounds like that's what you were dealing with as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
I'll say at Automation Anywhere, I've had the chance to talk with Mihir Shukla, our CEO, a couple. His approach is move fast, but in order to move fast, sometimes you need to spend a little time understanding exactly what it is you need, align all the different people. Once you do that work, then making decisions is easy.
Yeah.
And it takes a little more time to do that work up front.
What starts to quietly erode inside a company before the outside world fully sees that something is off, right? What starts to show up first? Is it culture? Is it communication? Is it leadership alignment? What's the initial warning signs of misalignment in an environment?
I think most of my experience has been at privately held companies without the benefit of the quarterly reporting, which pros and cons. I mean, there's certainly a lot of effort that goes into that and some secrecy that needs to go in advance of quarterly reporting. But within privately held companies, there's a spectrum of sort of what's normal in terms of transparency. And I think one of the things that starts to break down is the sort of the delta between what's being projected and what people start to see just from where they sit. Is there a delta between what's being projected in terms of either strategy or achievement and what their individual reality is?
Yeah,
And trust can erode. So those are like you start to see little elements of where does transparency, context, and trust, where do they intersect? And is it where the company wants them to be, or are they still being aspirational with their external communication? I think one of the things that we've done at Automation Anywhere in the last year and a half is start to measure trust. So we make that part of our annual and quarterly surveys. We ask questions around trust in colleagues, trust in leadership, trust in the organization's sort of financial position, et cetera. And by asking a series of questions, then we can start to see like what's a baseline for trust in things that we know they trust, and what's the things that we're really trying to get at. And we've found that the trust scores were higher than I actually anticipated. And so it was a good reinforcement that we're doing some of the right things. But
right.
I think that's where you start to see cracks in the edges. Full-throated trust versus, okay, I'm here, I like my job, I like my coworkers, I'm not sure if I understand or believe the rest of it.
Yeah, so that brings me to thinking, what do you think people normalize for too long because things are starting to look really good on paper? Like you brought up the trust surveys, and I've definitely taken them myself at different companies. Do you think that people are normalizing their environment, or do you think that's really just a myth?
I think our experience has experienced some pretty big waves, swings of the pendulum over the last couple of years. We have experienced, and I think we're going into this part of the pendulum right now, and hopefully we come back out of it, but we're normalizing a sense of security over sort of a sense of what's right. And I think we had a brief period where across all industries and all sectors in the US, say 2021, early 2022, where people really saw that as an opportunity to feel good, go towards mission-driven organizations, find roles where their skills and skills, experience, everything came to bear, compensation aligned for a lot of people. And I think my concern is that we start to normalize security, the sense of security,
Right.
over sort of doing the right thing for ourselves, for our organizations, and ultimately, I don't know, I'm a parent, so I want to set a good role model for my child that we have decisions every day to do the things that we do. Uh,
That up because I
yeah,
think right now in society, we're seeing that you should be thankful for the job you have almost. That's really the attitude people are having, as opposed to we have options, we could change, we could move to a better environment. When do you think you started to see that shift happen where I'm going to call it job scarcity is keeping people in the positions that they're in?
I think in tech, I saw it around the time Silicon Valley Bank collapsed early
For
2023.
that.
That was the start for me of the pendulum shift back, that there was going to be, and maybe rightly so, but there
Yeah.
was going to be a focus in tech around sort of profitability over growth. And in making that shift, you start to see little things change over the next couple of years. And granted, for the business community, it might have been overdue, but that's where I started to see some of that shift. I think it's that sentiment is bad because it takes away people's ability to take risks, to try new things, to innovate.
Uh,
And we're in a period of time where innovation is gold. And people taking risks, trying new things is sort of the key to success. And if people are afraid to do those things because they're just sort of latching onto that sense of security, then it's not good for anyone.
Especially in the world of tech, right? Because I think if you're going to enter into tech, you're about the innovation, you're about the risk. And so this environment's almost muting that for people right now in a larger way than just a mission-driven culture.
And it's, yeah, and it quite frankly, it could be muting the ability for individual companies to succeed if all of their people aren't also taking risks and innovating at that same time.
So, in high growth environments, how often do you think internal reality starts to drift away from the story the company is telling itself?
I feel like it's almost a must. Like there has to be some projection of what the future looks like. So in high growth companies, there's there's a need from a business perspective and from a funding perspective and from an employee engagement perspective, but there's a need to project a future that's positive. What is it that our company can do? What can we achieve? What are we playing for? What are the things that we want the marketplace to see us as?
Yeah.
And to some extent, all of that has to be forward looking in high growth environments. So I can forgive the sort of difference between reality and that on some level. So I respect the difference. I think there's got to be a path. And I think in every company, there's always some forward looking projection that's different from reality, but there has to be a believable path. And I think it's quite often that there's a projection that isn't tied to a believable path. And I think that's the challenge.
Yeah, I think what I struggle with is sitting as an employee and hearing the external voice and it not matching the internal reality and having to catch up myself professionally on how do I coach a team? How do I continue staying motivated? And what does that look like? How have you had that experience and have you had to sit with leaders and convince them things are working or kind of I don't want to use the word convince, but guide them towards that, having those conversations? Like, how do you bridge that gap?
So I think that's my job. There's a handful of things that are in my job description. That's one of the biggest parts of my job.
Yeah.
The times it's worked is when people feel comfortable asking questions and challenging the answers. I think if there's an open dialogue between leadership and employees and everybody in between, it can't just be town halls and all hands, and then so CEOs, C team talking straight to the employees. It can't just be leadership to management. It's got to be throughout the organization. So as a manager, that's one of the hardest roles is to sort of bridge the gap if I don't have all the tools. And
Yeah.
so what I try to do is create the environments. And quite frankly, it's a matter of listening, giving the space to ask questions, not punishing people for asking hard questions, allowing for some grace with the responses because I would love it if every one of the CEOs I've ever worked with had all the answers to the future. The reality is they have to make decisions based on less than perfect information. And so I think when there's enough trust in an organization, then I think the management teams from all the way down to line level managers to the C team, if everybody is understanding that we don't have all the answers, it's going to take all of us to arrive at the best answers. And anybody's welcome to ask questions. Anybody's welcome to sort of help us bulletproof our future by asking questions and challenging assumptions.
I like that approach, the transparency.
Yeah.
Do you feel like people are transparent with you, or do they get nervous?
There was an episode of Hidden Brain, and at the risk of like tying into another podcast, where they were asking shoppers at a grocery store about the healthy choices that they were going to make before they went into the grocery store. And when they interviewed them again afterwards, there was a split between the ones that they'd asked about what healthy choices are you going to make today versus what did you buy today.
Yeah,
And so just the act of me asking people questions, so being in human resources or people experience, just the fact that I'm in the role that I'm in, when I ask questions, I know I'm going to get potentially a filtered response. And so I work to demonstrate enough reliability that I'm going to use the information that people share with me in a responsible manner. And over time, so part of the reason I like staying long periods of time at positions is that it gives me the time to build the trust and build the relationships I need so that people can be honest with me. I will say there's an arc to that in this role. I feel like perhaps I get less than full trustworthy answers in my first 6 months to a year and
yeah.
much better at 3 years and beyond.
I will say, I think it's
Mhm.
the involvement, it's the will to wanna have the conversations that I think just kind of breaks the barrier of trust and moving forward and evolving as a culture. So, I agree with you, I think that's the first step.
Yeah, and we've done so much over the last few years to scale those kinds of things. So we have surveys, we've got
Yeah,
other listening mechanisms. Companies are starting to use sentiment analysis in different areas. So either reviewing comments from surveys. I know there's some tech that can be deployed to measure sentiment analysis in a Slack channel or things
yeah,
along those lines. All of those things are helpful, but they don't paint the full picture. So we're trying to balance leveraging tech and artificial intelligence with what insights does that bring to the HR team so that we can ask better questions of the right people at the right
mhm,
time so that we can engage in those conversations in a more productive manner even.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
it's helped us be more focused in those conversations.
So, you've been at Zenefits, you changed roles at Zenefits, you went through a merger with a larger company. Now your current role, what did you personally have to unlearn about leadership after being in some of these environments?
I had to unlearn my opinion, I guess, my opinion of my own expertise. I think at
Mhm.
different levels, I've had to demonstrate a certain amount of expertise. And then at a higher level, I need to recognize that that got me to that step, but won't get me to the next step. And so
Yeah,
when I think about it in terms of HR expertise, so providing a service to our customers at Zenefits, I needed to have solid knowledge around compliance and sort of the governance and setup that small and medium-sized businesses would need. The ability to sort of guide people in short conversations to making good decisions. Some of that was helpful in the next role, but what I really needed to do in the next role was listen more,
yeah,
sort of finger on the pulse of the organization as opposed to the expert with the answers. And so understanding what I'm good at and that it's not important anymore was hard for me.
yeah.
So building a certain amount of credibility in one area and then realizing, okay, that was good, but it it's not the thing that's going to help me here.
So one thing I remember about Zenefits, and probably right before it got acquired, I would assume, it was a strong urgency culture, right? There was a lot of action, and you were right there at the helm. Did your relationship at all change with urgency after experiencing, like, that kind of intensity?
Because our sort of business focus shifted a couple times in my time there, it certainly, I mean, it created a number of series of urgent events that over time, I think people struggle with always operating at that level of urgency.
Yeah.
The One of the things I think we did well in the later years of Zenefits was narrow down our focus. So what are the things that we're absolutely going to do, and what are the things that we're going to do the best we can, but we can't devote the same kind of energy that we used to devote to
Right.
that.
Right.
And that's hard because it was even the things that we wanted to focus on, we didn't necessarily have the staff, the funding, the time to do the things that
Sure.
we wanted to do. And so it became a matter of priorities. And I think when everything's important, it's this sort of high urgency all the time and difficult for people to cope long term. I think 3 months, no problem. 6 months to a year starts to be draining, 2 years plus, people just leave.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I think 3 months, you can withstand it. Anything past that, it becomes really draining.
Mhm.
Is there anything you did in that time to help rebuild some clarity? Because it sounds like it was a really, I don't know, like you mentioned, straining event. Is there anything that you can act on to rebuild some clarity in that moment to help the environment?
If I look back at Zenefits, the things that worked were when we identified one or two problems that needed to be fixed, and one or two, like company wide, one or two
Yeah.
problems that needed to be fixed, and perhaps one opportunity forward looking that we had, and do those, and create, I mean, pull people from different organizations together, make it a broad effort. And what that allowed us to do was sort of get from a point of view where we were pointing fingers around where the problem sits and how am I supposed to move forward, to this is what we're going to do right now. We're going to put the effort into it. We're going to solve it. It's going to take more effort than we'd like to be able to spend, and maybe more of a distraction now. But when we fix it, we'll be able to do some of the other things that we want to do. So let's do this first.
I love that because I
Mhm.
think a lot of people think you boil the ocean. There's tons of problems out there inside the workplace, outside the workplace, right? I think you can overwhelm yourself. And so, really, just picking two company wide issues you can move towards solving, or one that's going to be really impactful for people, is a right approach that kind of moves you out of that urgency culture into more clarity. Yeah.
It created urgency around that one thing, but there was a light at the end of the tunnel. So
Sure.
if we can do this in this period of time, these are the four things that get easier for us after that.
Yep. So, when you look at high growth companies today, what do you think leaders still consistently get wrong? Or what gets mistaken for strong leadership?
And I think one of the things that we're working on right now is, what are the most important parts of being a manager? I think being a manager is ultimately the way we've built management, at least in tech over the last few 10 or so years, is sort of a dual role. It's accomplishment through the efforts of the team, and then it's also sort of the care and feeding and development of the individual. And I don't think we've done as well on the care and feeding and development of the individual. I think we've overemphasized the accomplishment in recent history, and it's a change. I have friends who are now retired who worked at large multinational corporations, who came up the ranks in management, and they had thousands of hours of management training and years of mentorship and things along those lines. And if I look at my experience in tech, nobody invests that kind of time, money, energy in leadership development. And so we promote people that are good at their jobs and seem to have a reasonable connection with their teams. And we do a little bit to prop that up, and probably not enough. And so the result is that we reward accomplishment and at the detriment of care and feeding and development of the individual. I think there, and one of the things that we're working on, is there a way to layer in tech to help those things? So can we leverage agentic AI to augment the leader's ability to do some of those things, augment the expectation that the leader does some of those things? Or maybe do we bifurcate the role of management into people that can get the ball down the field and people that can take the time to have a 2 hour conversation with somebody about where they want to be in 5 years, how their family's doing, what things they're worried about in work and life. And sort of it allows some amount of urgency to continue in an organization, but still the sense of self and belonging to continue as well.
I'm really glad you brought this up because when you were talking about this, I was thinking, is the lack of training with management add to the chaos in tech environments more so than other environments?
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
I mean, where's
I'm
the chicken or
giving
the
it.
egg there? But yeah. I think in every company I've ever worked in, there's a handful of really good seasoned managers.
Yeah.
And there's a handful of people who are just starting out with really good intentions and a lot of potential and everything in between.
Yeah.
I think the element of focus and pace is tough to modulate when either you don't have that as example as a manager or you just haven't seen it yet.
And it
I
must
think
be hard
you're
on a
onto
new.
something.
I'm like, Danny, you're unlocking a lot of thoughts in my mind right now because now I'm thinking it's unfair, actually, if you think about the amount of pressure in a tech environment that already exists for a high
Mhm.
growth company, and then a new manager who comes on board who's done well, and you're giving them the ability to now manage a team with probably not very much training. And I'm sure the intent is there to do well. I like to believe that everyone wants to do well. Um, so yeah, I can see how maybe the environment might contribute to the chaos in management and team leadership.
I think there's more that we can do there. We're working on some things that hopefully will allow us to do that. I'll let you know how they go. So
Yeah.
I think there's an opportunity for tech to help there and make us be better humans.
Oh, well, that's an uplifting thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, in a world right now where everyone is confused about tech and AI entering into the workforce, I think it's nice to hear that people management, people experiences, departments are thinking that it's a positive for management. That's great.
I think if we take the approach of how can this help us be better as people, I think it'll help us design the tech in the workplace to do that. I think if we don't take that leadership, I think the sort of the tech and the urgency certainly are valuable things,
Right.
but we'll just emphasize that element of it, and we'll ultimately end up building things that, I don't know, fulfill people's fears. So I think it's an important moment for chief people officers, chief human resources officers, everybody in those fields to think about how this is going to shape the workplace, shape how people interact with each other, shape how innovation gets built and how things get accomplished is critically important as well. But how do all those things come together? And and this is a moment where we need to learn real fast and lead on it.
I like how politely you were with that statement.
I've been there as well.
Yeah,
So
I get it.
yeah. Mhm.
I want to close out with one question,
Yeah.
which is if someone is operating inside a chaotic growth environment right now, what's one thing they should stop normalizing and start realizing in the current state?
I think to stop normalizing would be the idea of everything is important. I think the best way to move forward in a chaotic environment is pick a handful of priorities.
Yeah.
For me, that looks like making lists of things and then rearranging in sort of a stack rank and drawing the line somewhere when I realize that's all that can get accomplished.
Yeah.
As a leader, it sometimes feels easier for me to make those kinds of lists because I've got the political capital to be able to do that. And and do that on behalf of my team. As an individual, I think my advice would be to be transparent around, I don't know, I was an economics major in college, but the concept of opportunity cost.
Right.
Everything can be done, but at what cost? Some things cost money, some things cost time, some things mean the cost is that we can't do something else that might actually be more important.
Okay.
And I think most of us are dealing with the concept of opportunity cost, the idea that if I do everything, there's something I'm not doing as well as I should or in the time that I should. And I think having some sense of what's truly important and mission critical is needed. I think the other thing that helps us do is carve out enough time to continue to learn and grow. Because if we're
Yeah.
not thinking about what we're going to be doing a year from now, much less 5 years from now, we're not working towards those things, and we won't be ready when the year from now comes. It's too easy to be focused on all the things that need to get done today. So I think focus on a handful of the most important things and make sure that there's a little time and prioritize for personal development.
Yeah, I appreciate that outlook because if everything's urgent, nothing really is. That's the takeaway.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And perhaps not accomplishing as much as you could. Yeah.
that's a positive way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Well, I am really optimistic about agentic AI in the HR worlds and looking forward to just seeing how that rolls out and starts helping people in different environments. And I'm glad to hear that it's already on the forefront of people experience.
We're working on it. I hope
Yeah.
others are too, and we'll see where it goes over the course of the next year or so. Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining today, Danny.
Thank you so much, Colleen.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Build Without Chaos. If today's episode resonated, subscribe and share it with someone else who's building without chaos.